Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all for an enlightening session on human rights violation during the global health crisis. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination. These rights are all interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. To protect human rights is to ensure that people receive some degree of decent humane treatment. To violate the most basic human rights, on the other hand, is to deny individuals their fundamental moral entitlements. It is, in a sense, to treat them as if they are less than human and undeserving of respect and dignity. From the day we are adversely hit by a global health crisis, journey of violations of inherent rights has begun. Being a human rights activist is an arduous task. Human rights activist is a person who individually or with others acts to promote or protect human rights. We have with us Choudhary Ali Zia Kabir sir, a great soul working for betterment of society and making justice access to underprivileged. He possesses wide experience in the field of human rights. We would like to thank him for his presence in today's webinar, even after a busy schedule. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Right. Good evening, everyone. I'm very sorry that I got late. I was supposed to come at 6. So, I'm sorry, I don't get to see pictures of people. How does this thing work?
All the attendees are requested to open their cameras and you can also unmute your mics.
Just see, guys, we have half an hour. And if it's not too much, you can turn on your cameras so it looks like you guys are actually there and I'm speaking. And may I have a little general idea what sort of people are here today? So, Hemal Pandey, what do you do, Hemal?
Good evening, sir. Myself Himal
evening.
Pandey. I'm from Raipur, Chhattisgarh. I'm currently pursuing my master's in English literature. I'm in the final semester, as well as I'm also associated with UNICEF as a local volunteer, and I'm also a student activist. Thank you.
Right. So Hemal is there. All right, I'll start. Guys, my name is Kabir and I'm an advocate. I'm practicing since 2015. And I have been associated with this firm called Human Rights Law Network. And basically what we do is that we look upon law as a tool to further human rights. There are lots of ways to securing human rights to people, and law is just one among many. And we don't even believe that it's the best one, but yes, it's a significant one. So that's my short description, and you can address me as Kabir. And I'm not as great as Avinash has said it, but yes, we do work for human rights. So today's issue, and I can speak in English, Avinash?
Yes, sir, you can speak in English.
Right. I hope I am audible to everybody. Am I audible to you, Tanya? Right.
Yes, you are audible, yeah.
Thank you. So let's begin from the beginning, as Avinash is saying that what exactly is human rights? There are lots of different definitions of human rights, and if you have studied law and a little bit of jurisprudence, you would realize that earlier people would say it's a natural right which every human being must have and you can't deprive them. Then suddenly in the 18th and 19th century, we talked about human rights as we had this utilitarian understanding of human rights, that human rights is nothing, but it's all about giving a greatest good to the greatest number of people in society. The very latest understanding of human rights is that of analytical school of jurisprudence. Ask me to stop and explain wherever I'm going too fast. So this theory, propounded by John Rawls, which was one of the thinkers, he simply says that if you have to understand human rights, what you have to imagine is that you will be born 10 years from today, and you will be born in a society you don't know anything about. You don't know your own position in that society. You don't know what will be your age when you will be born, whether you will be an old person or a young person or a child, what would be your gender, your sex, or your race or your ethnicity. And even if you will be born as a human being or, say, an animal, little bit, I believe he borrowed from the concept of punarjan. So he says that if you were to be reborn in a society 10 years from today, what kind of society you would like to be born into? So it's a very simple question to understand. If I were to disappear today and I were to be born in 2030, and I don't know where I'll be born, will I be born in India or elsewhere? Or, welcome Swati, how are you? Right. So I don't know which sort of society I will be born into, whether I'll be born a man or a woman. Which race will I belong to? Will I be an Asian or a Caucasian or a black person? Or whether I will even be an animal or a human being. If you imagine that sort of society, what would you want in that society? First of all, you would want an equality in that society, that everybody should have an equal right. There should not be any discrimination on gender. It shouldn't be a society where women are paid less than men merely because they are a woman. It should not be a society where blacks are discriminated, where a police officer sits on a black person and suffocates him to death. So all in all, you're not aware. And since you're not aware whether you'll be born as a human being or an animal, you probably would want a great amount of animal rights. You would probably campaign for veganism, so on and so forth. So the easiest way to understand society and the human rights, not society, the human rights, is those rights which you would want to be available for everybody in the society if you don't know in which capacity, which social and economic position you will be born in that society. So that's a very latest understanding of human rights. Moving on, today's issue is COVID-19 and human rights. You see, I'll begin with talking about change. One thing which is constant in society is change. Change will happen, you like it or not. And this is the only thing certain, that the change will be there. Now, change happens in two ways. One is the constant low-level change which is happening, which often human beings are not able to notice, and they are not affected much by it. So slight change in societies over the course of 100, 200, 300 years, the change in values and morality of the society, the slight change in dressing sense, or how much of the skin can one expose. These are very small changes, which we don't tend to notice. And rightly or wrongly, the reason is that, one, we are psychologically not capable of detecting such small changes every day. You are not able to detect a tree growing. It's that slow a change. Secondly, because we have a lot of time to adapt to such changes. So we are not much bothered. There is a second type of change, which is very sudden and it is very enormous. And it is so sudden and enormous that this is the change which we almost always notice. And this is the change that you can't ignore. Societies often have these changes. These changes are brought about great natural calamities, bloody revolutions, or say you have these volcanoes exploding, or deluge, or wars, or lastly, the pandemic, the one which we are facing today. While COVID-19, a lot of people say, and I have read it, is that it is monumental in the change that it has engineered, the change that it has triggered. Some go so far as saying that the COVID-19 is probably the sort of change the societies, in terms of its outreach, experience, the world experience, probably not since the Ice Ages. Because if you imagine a common person living in a small town in, say, India or some part of Africa was not so much affected by the world wars. The person was not so much affected even by the decolonization which was taking place. But that person is directly and severely affected by the COVID-19. So change is there. Another thing is that how does societies take change? It is said that human beings are fond of change. We like change. It has been theorized that we came out of Africa not because we were dying of hunger or starving to death, but because we wanted to change, a sort of innate adventurism. Therefore, we migrated into the unknown territories. While human beings always have this restlessness of change, we all have, we are never content with what we have. Something we acquire gives us pleasure for a limited time, and then we sort of start looking for what we don't have, what should change, what new should come. Now, paradoxically, while we are very fond of change, we are also very scared of change. We like change. We want things to change, but only for the better. But the innate quality of the change is that it is almost always uncertain. The change may be good, but it's dangerous. We never know of the outcome. So the paradox that humanity has is that we long for change, but at the same time, we are afraid of it. And whenever change happens in society, we sort of become much more conservative. We sort of shuts up, and we like to see familiar things. We want to go back to orthodoxies. And that's what happens in societies all along. Societies, when they're prosperous, they're more welcoming of change. They entertain ideas, fashions, different sensibilities, so on and so forth. But as great upheavals comes about, societies become very rigid. They sort of seeks to point out who is the different one among them. They usually turn on minorities. They usually turn on immigrants and other marginalized sections of the societies, which are anyway at the lower packing order. And societies have different people. All societies have hierarchies. And in all societies, you will find these classes of human beings, which are more at the receiving end. In any given societies, the common groups of human beings which are at the receiving ends are women, historically speaking, women, children, migrants, refugees, minorities. They may be religious minority or ethnic minority or cultural minority. And yes, so you always have these societies which are sort of at the receiving end. And when the change happens, when the change is sudden and we are uncertain, we sort of start pressurizing them for two reasons. One, as a society in a whole, we become less tolerant. We cannot tolerate dissent anymore. Second reason is that we need to find someone to blame for the misfortune, which we don't understand why is happening. So the famous example which is given is that of Socrates. Socrates was a very famous philosopher in ancient Greek. I promise I'll keep these anecdotes very short. So he was a very famous philosopher. He would often challenge the elites of the society, and he would often point fingers, talk about the inequalities, the injustice, how people are sent to jail without proper trial, so on and so forth. And he used to often criticize the ruling class, the kings and the generals and so on and so forth. And he was celebrated in the ancient Athens. He was considered as a great philosopher. That was so until the Athenians started losing wars. And one after another, when they were losing wars, they were subjugated. There was a foreign leadership governing Athens. And then they somehow overthrew the foreign leadership. But they were very weak. That was the time when the Socrates was forced to drink poison because he was considered too radical, even though that was the time when he was on the side of the Athenian state and fighting for its independence. That whenever change happens, and if the change is unfortunate, we find someone to blame is a very common and very individual experience. You must have noticed losing something very good or some unfortunate incident. It could be as little as missing the bus, or it could be as big as not getting that scholarship that you were trying hard for. And the first thing which comes to us is we start looking for things to blame. Oh, this public transport is so bad. The drivers are never on time. My friend, he really had to waste so much of my time that I couldn't take the bus in time. Oh God, I wrote a very good essay for the scholarship, and the things are unfair. They don't give scholarships to me. They don't give scholarship to whichever community you belong to. You might say, oh, I think they have discriminated against. Why would they give it to me? So on and so forth. So the basic point that I'm trying to say is that whenever there is a change, we are scared. We are scared of the fact that we are not able to predict what comes next. And whenever we scared, we react by finding victims, finding people to blame. And that is probably what's happening in the COVID-19 change. It is an enormous change. So one thing, because of the COVID-19 and difficulties it is arising, we are constantly looking for someone to blame, who is to fault, whether it is China, whether it's the minorities in India. And if you go to other countries, it's not common, it's not just an Indian thing. Bad governments across the world are finding someone to blame. If you go to Brazil, people go so far as saying that the COVID-19 is spreading because of the homosexuals. If you go to some part of Africa, there people are, and these are not the things which are being, I'm imagining, these are happening, and I read it this morning. There's a particular president in an African country which says that, look, COVID-19 is spreading because people are not going to church regularly. And therefore, everyone who goes to church will be automatically saved. Those who are to blame for COVID-19 are all those who don't go to church, meaning thereby everybody who's not a Christian. So it's all common. Now, the second thing is, what's the situation in India because of the COVID-19? I don't think how much I will benefit by repeating facts to you all. You have all seen the condition of migrant laborers, how people had to walk back thousands and thousands of kilometers to reach back their homes. You've also seen that how you must have seen the visuals and lots of videos are being circulated on WhatsApp and so forth, where people are beaten up, and other discriminations which people have felt. So change is bad for us. I beg your pardon. Change is not bad for us. This particular change is hard on those people of our society which are less fortunate. So what has happened because of the COVID-19? You can pick any group, any of these groups which I've mentioned before. Women. Because of the COVID-19, everybody is at home, and women's work has increased several fold. Now, if you're from a lower strata of society, now you have this husband you have to deal with 24/7, and because he's home all the time, he's often irritated. Because there is less money, he's all the more irritated. You're the one who is forever looking after children, and you don't have a life of your own. If you're a child, you're suffering because you don't have as much education. You're not able to go to school and educate yourself much. All these problems are many-fold if you are poor. If you're a rich person who has a large enough house where everybody has a separate room of their own, you can be quite comfortable. But if you're not so fortunate, you're the one at the receiving end. I mean, imagine a slum, for example. I work on right to housing a lot. So if you go to slums, it's a single room where 6 of the family are there. And constantly in that room, 6 people together, they must be, it's only human to drive each other crazy. So if you're a poor person, you suffer more. If you're a poor person, you don't have savings. You can't afford to stay at home, even if you want to, because you have to go out to work to feed your family. And the choice is a deadly one for you. Either you risk your life and that of your family by going out, or you starve to death. It's very stark choices. These are the kind of choices which were presented to our migrant laborers, because we refuse to understand that there's a great part of our society which is not very audible. And if we are educated, we have been to university and we have been in big cities or Delhi and so on, we sort of ignore them. We think this is the world. Well, obviously, I haven't seen anyone who's dying of hunger. So therefore, we assume that such people don't exist. But that's not true. There are a lot of people who are very poor. And if you haven't come across any, if you are not friends with any, we are not friends with any, then that means that we are living in a cocoon. So these migrant workers, when the lockdown was announced, suddenly they are told, a rickshawala is told that you can't play and you have to stay at your home 24/7 and no more going out. Now in a city like Delhi, if you happen to have an opportunity to converse with them, you would realize that their daily income is 500 to 600 on a good day. If that's what they're earning daily, and out of this they have to send a large part of it back to their family too, what must be their savings? How long can they survive on their own? So there you have people starving, people forced to walk back to their homes, thousands, 2,000 kilometers in some cases, dying on the road, sleeping somewhere. There were train accidents. You're all aware of it. So,
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
Rohit,
Yeah,
yes,
so I want to ask a question that why most of the people do not know about their human rights. That the migrants and laborer workers, they don't know how to get the ration at that time, or how to get money from the government, or some source that can help them. So how it can be easier for them to get these knowledge regarding their rights, how to get food and how to get permission for travel. For example, that some laborers have to book the train tickets online, but
right,
but laborers do not have that access of online registration.
right,
So
right.
what are your views on that?
I will turn to that question, and I'll just take the question in a moment's time. So, I'm not describing a lot as to what exactly are the problems faced by the people. We are all aware. We've been reading papers, we've been watching television news, and as much as today's media is not really facts-based, the facts are there for all to see. So this COVID-19 pandemic has not really created problems as much as it has exposed the existing problems. These problems were always there. These people were always poor. They were always suffering. What has happened merely is that this lockdown and this pandemic has increased their vulnerabilities and has exposed these shortcomings in our country, in our political system, in our health system, and in our social system for all to see. So that's all that has happened. It's not something that people have become poor because of pandemic. That's true to a certain extent, but they were already poor. So how could this all would have been averted? One way of averting or mitigating its effects is that if you would have been a good country, if your society would have been more equitable, there's no dearth of money in India. We are a large democracy. We are a very large economy, shrinking, but still very large. We are the country which is producing maximum number of millionaires every year. So you see, the problem is not per se the money, the wealth, but its distribution in the society. So I would say that human rights violations were there all along. Women were at the receiving end. There were caste-based atrocities and other violations, and minorities. COVID-19 has merely exposed them. So there is not so much as new than the highlighting of the existing problems. I'll now try and take some questions. And the first that you have asked is, I'll take the questions which were emailed, and then I'll take your question, Rohit. So the first is that we come across many news clippings daily that, especially during the lockdown, domestic violence has increased tremendously. Otherwise, also it is increasing. I think more stricter rules are needed to stop it completely. Yes, like all problems, the domestic violence has also increased many-fold. You have a lot of these unfortunate families where the men are abusive. Now, these men, these abusive men, used to be away from the house for at least 12 hours. So women had some respite. Now these men are there in the house 24/7. There's lack of money, there's lack of comfort, there's lack of enjoyment for them. So therefore they are becoming all the more violent, and there is an increase in domestic violence. Even in households, even if you are a person with best of intentions, even if not talking about these abusive people, if you're locked up in a house 24/7 and the house is not big enough and it's not comfortable enough, it is going to take a toll on your mental health, and you are going to react in ways that you will live to regret. So yes, the domestic violence has increased. What can we do to stop it immediately? Do we need more stricter rules? Well, one major problem of India, and this is my opinion, and others might disagree, is that the problem is not the lack of laws. We have a lot of laws. In fact, we are among the countries with most number of laws. The real problem is their implementation. So there already are existing laws, the protection of women from domestic violence, provisions of IPC, certain beneficiary provisions of CRPC. What we really need is that these women should be educated about their rights. They should be informed that this is the right you have, and if you want, you can seek this right. So we need to work upon its implementation. What any one of us can do in our individual capacity, one is left to wonder. That all right, things are bad and it's unfortunate, but what do? I'm just a student. Well, there's a lot you can do. First thing is that you intervene, that you not raise your voice, that you make your voice heard. So if there is a domestic violence taking place next to your house, you can try and notice the family. Lots of research indicate that the mere fact that every time there is a violence, if you come out in your balcony and merely try and look, this has some effect on the other person. These are psychological research, because the man now knows that other people are noticing what he's doing. Other people are not so busy in their lives. Next, what you can do is to approach the victim through telephone or whatever means are available to you and speak to them. Let them speak about their problems, and then you can offer them a solution. Don't be very strong and hard on them that no, you must take up this solution, otherwise you'll keep suffering like this. So this is a sort of a training which you will get when you start intervening. You can give them an opportunity, give them an option, keep that option open for them. That look, if you want to utilize this option, I'm always there. You can inform the police, you can take them to the police if they want to escalate it and if they agree to it. And then there are legal laws available. You can file a maintenance application in a criminal law where the husband will be forced to give them maintenance for their daily expenses, for an alternate accommodation to them, so on and so forth. I hope I have somewhat answered this question. Second is, what are the causes and effects of human rights violation? Should I take all these 20 questions which are supplied to me on a sheet, or should I take the questions from people here?
So we can take 2-3 questions and rest we can send them in a group.
Right. I'll try and take them very quickly, maybe now that people have asked them. What are the causes and effects of human rights violation? Well, this is a very big and enormous question in the sense that not very difficult to answer, but requires a lot of time. Causes of human rights violations are always this: one group of society, concentration of power and wealth, the increasing inequality in a society. That's the sole cause of human rights violation. You can read a lot on this, but ultimately you'll come to this conclusion, that if there is an inequality, either economic or power, then there will be a lot of human rights violation. Taking this domestic violence example, if there was an economic parity, if the women were as educated and they were allowed to earn as much as the men, then there would be no domestic violence, or at least very little. She will have the option to walk away. She will have that self-independence and dignity intact. So the causes of human rights violations are almost always concentration of power and wealth and inequality, and the resultant inequality in society. In what ways human rights violation is affecting the well-being or mental health of individuals? In every way you can possibly imagine. Mental health problems are very looked down upon in India. Mental health problems is not a question of whether or not you have mental health problems. It's always a question to what extent one has mental health problems. Every human being has mental health problems at some point of time in their life to some extent. So mental health problems are always there, and any sort of adverse situation where we feel unfairly dealt with only increase and exacerbate these mental health problems. What are the most common human rights that are violated, and which ratio of individuals got affected more? These questions, some of them are generic in nature. They're very good questions, not to say they are not, but they are in themselves a topic requiring enormous amount of time to address them. Most common human rights which are violated is, human rights are like, my teacher once told me that you have these ships sailing in the ocean. You can imagine different human rights as different ships. So you can have a ship called right to life, another one called right to housing, another one called right to health. Now imagine these ships sailing in the ocean, these dozens of ships, all connected with a chain to each other. Now what happens if one of the ships starts sinking? It will exert a drag on all the rest of the remaining ones. So therefore, human rights are not isolated. You can't say that this right is more important or less important than that one. If you violate one human rights, you are inevitably violating all the rest. If you suppose deny healthcare to people, are you violating their right to life? Yes. Are you violating their right to education? Yes, because the bad health means that they are not in a position to take the education, even if the opportunities are available. So human rights are all connected. They're like a delicate ecosystem. You can't say that one particular right is more targeted. But yes, having said that, we have different generations of right. The first generation, second and third. So most important human right for any person is the right to life. Because if you're not alive, you can't think about rest of your rights. You can't even think about casting a vote, your democratic rights. So right to life is the most important, which should be protected. And I believe, yes, this is the one most violated. Next is how to overcome or tackle such situations. So we'll talk about solutions in the end. 5 effective ways to deal with the circumstances for the whole world. That's a very big question for me to answer. This incident happened in my residential area. It's the question I'm reading. The family was of 4 members, including parents and 2 children. Father was tested COVID positive and special COVID-19 hospital took him to the hospital. Hospital authority not allowing family members to let them meet. After 8 days, son suddenly found his father died. Authority burned the patient's body, didn't call the family member. Family was in distress and couldn't find what has to be done in that situation. Meets, and the father died and his body was cremated. What can be done in this situation? There's a very particular legal question. I'm not sure whether such legal help can be given, but I'll answer it. You have to approach the police. If you believe there is some foul play, whatever you feel, you write in a complaint and give it to the local police. If the police does not accept your complaint, you can post your complaint to the police. And if after posting the complaint, they take no action, you can go to the magistrate's court under section 156 of the CRPC, saying that you have lodged this complaint with the police, but no action is being taken. And you can follow up from there. You can demand a lot of things. You can ask the hospital to give the complete medical history of the patient, detail of the treatment which was given, and you can also demand a post-mortem. At the time of health crisis, there are a few people who try to take advantage of this situation, incorporate the Hindu-Muslim debate by putting false allegation on any community. Why strict actions were not taken on such people? Well, that's true. As we say that in terms of pandemic, our prejudice against each other increase, and it happens across the world. And prejudice against minorities primarily. And minorities can be religious, they can be ethnic, they can be sexual minorities, transgenders and homosexuals, for example. So it's all there overall in the world to rise. Minorities may be belonging to a different race. Is it happening in India? Yes, of course it is happening in India. But then at the risk of being a little controversial, I believe this is now happening from quite half a decade. What can we do to combat it? Well, the one thing, you can speak out, raise your voice and say that, look, this is not right. If you're a white person in America and you see a black person being discriminated against, it will be most powerful if you speak out and say that's not fair. You should not do it. So one is this, you can raise your voice. Raising your voice doesn't mean that you always have to go to the street and shout. You can express your opinion on different modes available to you, different spaces available to you. It can begin with your family. When your family members are talking about it, you can say, I believe it's not fair. We can't blame the entire community, even if few were wrong, You can utilize the social media platforms. Thirdly, if you feel that somebody has actually been criminally violated, there has been some criminal wrong done to them, you can reach out to them and offer your help. You can say, my name is so-and-so and I'd like to help. You can lodge police complaints on their behalf, and you can try and pursue the matter. So there's a lot that you can do. Few NGOs are working to provide education to shelter home kids, but now it's not possible. We all know government schools want to educate online. Well, then these children are deprived of education. by the NGO volunteers care, loved by NGO volunteers care, and are prone to depression due to loneliness, lack of opportunities. This appears to be more of a comment. Yes, it's true that a lot of human rights work which we were earlier doing, human rights work which require face-to-face contact, that may be now very difficult. But if you're associated with an NGO, you can still reach out to these individuals. I believe that somebody in their family might have a smartphone. You can try and hold some session. You can try and reach out to them telephonically over the telephone calls. So there are still the ways in which you can help might have reduced a little, but the need for you to help has increased many-fold. So that should give us a new vigor. Next is the Mumbai case of brutality of a few people demanding for train facilities due to lack of awareness about pandemic is not just. Mob can be handled properly by beating harshly is not right. They were deprived of food, shelter due to their landlords asking them to vacate. I believe this is the incident where these migrant laborers, there was a false information by a news channel that special trains are working. And under that false pretext, migrant laborers started aggregating at the railway station. And then they were lathi charged by the police. In other states such as Gujarat, even though there was no misinformation, migrant laborers simply said that, look, we want to go our home and we will go our home. And all across India, they started walking back. It's true, it's bad the way they were handled. It's very bad that the way lockdown was announced. Government is well aware, governments are always well aware that what part of their population is utterly poor. If they did not know that so many people cannot tolerate their lockdown, then that is much more unfortunate. But my understanding is that the government knew, they just did not care enough. So when the lockdown was announced, the first thing in any of these great changes, and the society is going through upheavals, wars, pandemics, etc., one thing that you really want is the confidence of the people on the leaders, people who are ruling the countries and societies. First thing that they should do is to generate that confidence. And how do you generate that confidence? By absolute transparency. Don't think of people and societies as if they are fools and stupids and they are not the one who can understand, so therefore we are going to keep it secret. No, that's not the correct approach. Always tell people the full situation. Govern the society in these times, especially if you don't do so otherwise, upon science and not upon your political ideologies or religion or such things. So what we have done in India is that we failed to disclose it. We failed to act in time when all these things were starting in China and elsewhere and the disease was spreading across the world. We sort of woke up too late. In fact, as early as 16th of March, there was a tweet by the Health Department of the Union of India that it is not a pandemic and there's no need to panic. This should not have been the case. Government should have been aware and government should have been disclosing all facts. But most of the governments, especially in unfortunate countries, and I'm sad to count India as one, be it America or the Latin American countries or the Eastern countries or the South Asian countries, that leaders tried to fudge, being afraid, they were afraid that a panic might strike the people, and therefore they tried to divulge as little as possible. That was the wrong approach. When people are not aware of what's going on, they're all the more scared. And when government is not predictable, then you see all these hoarding up. So when the lockdown is announced, people by that time did not trust their government at all. I'm talking about India, and you must have seen immediately people started hoarding up because people simply don't trust the government. Same goes with these migrant laborers. All the problems that they faced could have been easily avoided had these things been kept in mind. After you declare the lockdown, then the government goes into thinking that, okay, now we should set up food shelters, we should start distributing dry ration. That can't be the case. These people don't have money enough to survive for 2 days. It can't be the case that 10 days pass and then you convene the meetings, that what measures should be taken. So we were too late. We were not prompt enough. Basically, we were not empathetic enough. We did not feel the problems of these people and we failed. Next is, while the laborers were the backbones of industries, factories, how can their rights be violated in prevailing COVID situation? Can they be given buses at least by their employers? Yes. Should the employers provide transportation to their workers? Yes. Did they provide the transportation to their workers? No. So it's more of a sad, unfortunate, factual question. They should have done it, but they did not. The transgenders solely depended on badhai, etc., but they were unable to get food. Food distribution quarantine centers are for males. Why the concept of khudol couldn't be implemented on the large level? I don't understand what khudol means, Khudol. But yes, I agree that transgenders and sex workers, these were, and you might have different views on sex workers. You might be guided, we all might be guided by our different moralities. But we have to admit that these were the most unfortunate people, the transgenders and the sex workers and the homeless people. They were the most affected by the lockdown, and some proper arrangements, rehabilitation mechanism for them should have been made. Educational institution going for online classes has been a burden to everyone. In spite of so much regulations for fee, schools are still asking, yes, that's true. Schools are still asking for fee. They're asking for as much fee. In some cases, they're asking for even more fee. That's true. And even though there are lots of directives and rules by the government, nobody seems to tame them. We go back to the same scenario, that there are laws, there are rules, but there is no implementation. That remains the challenge. Implementation will come about when each one of us starts reacting. Indian society has this great apathetic attitude towards everything. Yes, oh, it's bad, it's unfortunate, but yes, what can we do? We do not seem to raise our voice against injustices. So I think that's what we should start doing. If you know of a school which is overcharging, you can write to the school, and if the school does not answer, you can take the school to probably write a petition to the High Court. And these are not there's always a general thing that unless you're a law student, or even if you're a law student, and more so if you're not a law student, it is considered very burdensome. Going to the police, going to the court, it's not a pleasant experience. It's not a pleasant experience because we are not going there often enough. There's nothing very complicated about this law and the police. I get it that they're very intimidating for a common person who do not deal with them on an everyday basis. But at some point of time, we have to jump in. We can't keep sitting and thinking these things are very unfortunate, yeah, sad, but what to do? You have to get in the fights. You have to participate in the society. And that's something to do with our concept of democracy. Might be slightly outside the topic we are addressing here. Most of us think that when you are living in a democratic society, you only have to vote at the max. Most of the people, not most, a great majority do not even vote. Close to 50% people do not vote on an average. But those who vote, they believe that once I have casted my vote, it is not my job to bother myself with the problems of the society. I have to think about my own work, my own job. How am I going to finish this project? How am I going to get the next promotion? So on and so forth. And all these human rights issues are left to these particular group of people who are referred to as commonly human rights activists. I tell you what, in an ideal society, every individual, every citizen is supposed to be a human rights activist. What is the meaning of human rights activist? A person who, when sees injustice, decides to do and does something about it. So basically, a human rights activist is somebody who just displays empathy. And isn't empathy not a quality which we all are supposed to have? How can you walk away when you see that is it okay if somebody's injured and dying on the road to keep walking? When you see that, is it okay if someone is killing someone and you do nothing? Unfortunately, most of us now have come to that sort of a thinking that, no, it's not my problem. These are these NGO guys, I'm not the NGO types. You'll have some friend among you who will be working with some NGO lecturing all the time, and you'll be like, oh, these people, it's their job. They'll deal with it. I have to go back in the morning and do my job. I don't have time for it. And in India, it is also seen, and I've realized after lots of interaction with friends from other countries, is that we don't have a culture of voluntary work. We don't do voluntary work. It's not a common thing. From Monday to Saturday, we are doing our jobs, and weekends are for enjoying ourselves. If you compare this to many other countries in the world, especially the developed countries, people work from Monday to Friday, but then they determine that 8 hours every day, or every week, I'm sorry, not every day, 8 hours every week, they are going to dedicate for the service of society. They'll take up some cause. Once a month, I'll go, once a week, I'll go and teach these kids in the slum. Once a month, I'll do this. At the max, we in Indian society donate some money. That is also very rare. So I think what we should do if we really want answer to all these solutions is that we must decide and give ourselves target that, look, there will be a part of my life which I will live for the society. I'll live my life for myself, but a part of it I'll live for the society. How much will be that ratio in your life where you live for yourself and your society is for each one of us to decide as per our own capacity. And the best way to contribute to society is, yes, through money, but what is even better if you contribute through your skills. Each one of us has some skills which we can utilize for the public good. Next is what are the necessary steps to be taken to relieve the migrant workers and others during COVID-19 pandemic? Well, some of the cases are going on in Supreme Court, and if you will read these petitions, they list detailed steps which can be taken. So the first step which should be taken, what we can do, is to arrange for transportation for all those who wants to go back to their villages. So that should be first. Second, we should start providing food. Some governments are already providing. Largely, it's not effective. That's our common understanding, reporting to you from the ground. Second, that everybody should be provided food and temporary shelter. Third thing we should focus on is our healthcare, that everybody who's unwell should be provided healthcare. There are a number of innovative solutions which the government could have done, which the government did not do. When these migrant workers were walking back homes, government could have easily arranged food. And you might have seen that I'm not very well informed, but you might have seen that when this Kamar Yatra takes place annually, I believe, in our country, you see every few kilometers there are food stalls where the devotees can rest and recuperate. Question is, could the government do such a thing for these migrant workers? Answer is yes. Secondly, what we did not do, these are just some of off my head ideas. There is a vast resources available with the government. These suggestions were repeatedly given to the governments in cases after cases, right since the March, that we can also perhaps call in the emergency services, like the National Disaster Relief Force, or even the armed forces, to provide transportation to these workers. So these are some of the things. You will find lots of such solutions over the internet, or if you go through some of the orders by the Supreme Court. Next is, during the time of pandemic like COVID-19, how rights are being violated, how is it affecting the global health crisis, how to control it, and what can be the possible relief for the most inhuman cases that occurred during COVID-19 regarding starvation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, human rights violation, including censorship, discrimination, arbitrary detention, xenophobia, are reported. Legitimate, genuine concern is about the transgender and sex workers, also about the children of migrant workers. Do our country need a special law, an equality law? Well, I'll take the last question first. Yes, the transgender and sex workers were most at the receiving end. Do we need a special equality law? Well, it is a debatable question. There is a part of experts and activists who are working with the transgender who say that, yes, we need to have a separate law. My individual opinion, which could be wrong, is we already have the law. We have Article 14, which deals with equality. You have laws which bar discrimination on sex and gender. So the laws are always there. Or at least in this case, there are plenty of laws, but the implementation is the problem. So what we should focus more on is the implementation. Asking the government these difficult questions that why is this law not being implemented? Why is the conviction rate so low in this particular aspect? So I think that we need more. Another strain of question is that the pandemic has increased xenophobia, discrimination, censorship. It's true. This is a historical fact that whenever nation states have some sort of a calamitous situation, war, epidemics, such pandemic, natural disaster, they always declare a state of emergency. Whether it is declared or whether it is an undeclared emergency. And they appropriate themselves a lot of powers. They start censoring the press. They start censoring certain individuals. And these powers that these states accrue to themselves, they often willingly give them back. They never give them back. So you really have to fight for it. This is the very character of a nation state. For this, a little discussion needs to go more in the realm of the political science. But that's just the general thing. There are some of the common tendencies in all nation states, no matter how progressive they are. They're very territorial. They want more and more land. The government wants more and more power to itself, even if it comes at the cost of individual liberty. That has happened during this pandemic also. You must have seen that there is an increased persecution of the press. Journalists are prosecuted more and more. There are lots of people who are prosecuted for posting things about these the pandemic situations and treatments. You must have realized a lot of journalists, I believe one of The Wire or I believe The Quint, if I'm not mistaken, being arrested and FIRs are being lodged against them for reporting on the COVID-19, for reporting on the condition of quarantine centers and so on. So has the repression increased? Yes. You might see that the arrest and detention has also increased. Now, this is again a little bit of a thing which you might disagree with, but that's true. You can take the Delhi situation. There were not so many arrests of these anti-CAA protesters before the COVID-19 lockdown. But after the lockdown, when these people are not really in a position to get themselves an advocate, the arrests have increased manyfold. And it's not just in this case. You would see in many other different parts of the city, different parts of the country, police has become more aggressive because they know it's a lockdown and the justice delivery system is not working as efficiently as it ought to, and therefore they can get away with it. So that general understanding, I wouldn't say sort of a general feeling is there with the police forces, that sense of impunity. So yes, xenophobia has increased. Yes, arbitrary detentions have increased. All that is true. Now, all these are a bit of a problem. You, being a student, might ask that, all right, I understand. These are problems. Okay, something is bad is happening. Things can be better. I get some general idea. What can I do individually? I think each one of us can be a human rights activist. Human rights activist is it should not be a specific job category for specific people in the society. Every human being should be a human rights activist, and all of you can be. What do I mean when I say that you should be a human rights activist? All I'm wanting you to do is that you should stop playing safe in your life. Stop being not bothered to what is happening to your neighbor. Just generate some empathy in you. Become more empathetic. That means that you understand other people's problems and that you intervene in their problems, of course, with their permission. So don't just be so busy in your own lives. If you see, and once you get that thing, that it is your duty to intervene if you see some injustice happening, you will see that you are not just, you have switched state from being in a position to just sit and criticize and notice problems. You have now placed yourself in a position when you are making interventions which are making situations better or which will make situations better in the long run. You can begin with your family. Patriarchy is something which affects all our families. So if you see your parents, suppose you're, for an example, I'm not assuming this thing, Your father being unfair to your mother. She is the one being forced to do all the household work. Your sister are the ones who do all the cleaning and all. You can begin from there. You can say, look, I refuse to do it if you are the sister. Everybody has to do its own work, and I'm not doing it for you. If you are a male person in the family, you can raise your voice. Say, it's not fair. It's unjust. It should not happen. And you can keep making interventions. In the beginning, you may feel that you're not successful, but you have to raise your voice. You can raise your voice in your family if there is any gender discrimination, if there are talks of religious discrimination. Outside your family, you can look to your neighbors. If they need your help, you must help them. If they're doing something that they ought not to, you can raise your voice there. It might come across as flimsy, you know. You can even write them emails and letters, writing, look, I saw how you were maltreating your household help yesterday. And I'd like to flag this point that this is most unfortunate, and I'm disappointed. I did not like it. Even this will have strong effects, because now people would know that you are bothered, you are noticing it. Outside your neighborhood, in general society, you see injustice happening, you can always intervene. Intervene no matter what your financial situations are, no matter what your social position is. So what can you do if you see the migrant workers walking across? You must have seen these enormous examples I've seen with my own eyes, that common, ordinary people who have nothing to do with politics of the day, and they're not even very affluent. They came out of their houses and they were distributing food packets. I saw once in Delhi that this couple came in a car with lots of packets of Parle G biscuit, and they were distributing it to the people who were there waiting for the train, sitting on the platform. So they might have done very little, but they did something. And it may be little in the larger scheme of things, but for that very person who received that help, it might have been the difference of life and death. You never know. So I think simple solution is, we understand there is problem, we understand bad things are happening. What do? Just start intervening. Now, if there are any specific questions I'd like to answer. Rohit, you asked something. Could you repeat your question?
Yes, sir. I asked about the workers who travel from the train, but the registration for the train is online. So most of them do not have the access to that online thing, and
Right.
even they do not have the rights or the information regarding anything, the guidelines that government issues regarding COVID-19.
Right. I'll tell you. Now, what can I do? For example, I'm a student. I'm a second year student of a BA program in Delhi. What can I do? I know this isn't happening. All that I have to do is to arrange for a chair, arrange for a table, and arrange for a poster. I go to the railway station with my laptop, connect my laptop with my phone using a hotspot, and I put a board there, Muft Sahayata, ticket booking ke liye. And you will see that the people will flock to your table. As people come, you greet them and tell them how you can help. They will tell you, I want to go to this place, I'm not able to. You check and book their tickets then and there. So it's a simple thing, what you can do. You can also persuade the government to do the same thing, but at the same time, at an individual level, you can come forth and help. You can simultaneously keep on asking the government that such help stations should be set up at the railway stations where people can just come. You're right. An average migrant laborer, suppose a rickshaw puller, is not fortunate enough to receive education where he can go online, apply for a pass, get a license, get his test done, and then book his tickets online. To begin with, he wouldn't have a debit or a credit card. If he has, he wouldn't know how to know it. So therefore, it was for the government to set up these help desks in sufficient numbers at all railway stations, bus stands, and all that. But if there is a railway station, a bus stand near to your house, you can go and sit there. I know if you haven't done this sort of work before, it might seem a bit embarrassing, awkward, because, well, I haven't done such a thing before. But once you go there, and you'll realize that it's not very difficult. It's very simple for you, and it's very, very enormous help for all those migrant workers. Have I answered your question, Rohit?
Sir, but this is at the individual level. If what government can do or what I can do, that it helps them to know about more regarding the food that they can get from this place or some NGOs working over there. So
Mhm.
how can we communicate to them in an easier way?
How can the government communicate them to an easier way?
Or NGOs or anyone else that they can help them regarding anything like food. Even the ration shops are not working properly at the time of COVID because
Mhm.
there is shortage of foods or something else there is going on. So people are suffering from different uh, difficulties at all the times.
Yes. So there's a basic problem that you're highlighting is that of information dissemination.
Yes, sir.
So there are certain
Everyone do not know about their rights or how to deal with this process. If they have the information, they can do the things very easily and rightly by any source or with the help of others also.
right. I understand, Rohit. The simple question is the problem is about the information dissemination. We are not doing enough for these people. If we are doing enough, if there are foods and shelters and so on and so forth, the information is not available with these people. So how can the information be supplied? It's just simply, I don't understand what could be the difficulty in it. What the government or the NGOs can do. One is that you do keep receiving these SMSs when there are elections in Delhi. At least in Delhi, I receive it from XYZ political party that please vote for us. Government could have simply sent these SMSs informing people about the list of all the centers, regularly sending this information, list of all the quarantine centers, the food distribution centers, the help desk, that could have been done. Government could start a helpline and that this is the one number on which anyone can call and anyone can get all the information about where the hospitals are, where the nearest quarantine centers are, where the food is, how to get the tickets booked, what all documents are you require, what are the trains leaving when from where. So helpline could be set up. Information could be pushed on to people's devices using SMSs and all that. You can also have these information boards or the information help desk set up at the prominent public spaces. They can be as common as a red light or the railway stations, all at different hospitals. You could have a help desk outside an hospital whenever people come informing them that what is the status of this hospital and if you want to go home, what to do. So all these public places already exist. All that the government had to do is to set up help desk, virtual, on telephone, and actual physical help desk. Not very difficult.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Any other question?
No, sir.
Is there anyone else I can help with?
Does anyone else want to ask any question?
Guys, I take.
Hello. Yeah,
Yes.
hello. हाँ जी
Shalini.
जी hi Kabir.
Hi.
Actually, I want to talk about something domestic violence. Actually,
Right.
हम लोग भी domestic violence के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. तो ये सिर्फ प्रॉब्लम ऐसा नहीं है कि अगर हम बात कर रहे हैं कि सिर्फ वो लोअर क्लास की प्रॉब्लम है. इवन हम अच्छे फैमिलीज में भी इस समय देख सकते हैं कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस इंक्रीज हुआ है. प्रॉब्लम ये है कि जैसे देयर इज अ लॉ, डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के लिए लॉ है, लेकिन प्रॉब्लम सबसे पहले बात ये कि विमेन कितनी अवेयर हैं. ठीक है, अगर हम ये जिम्मेदारी लेते हैं कि हम विमेन को अवेयर करते हैं कि वहाँ आपके लिए लॉ है. अब ये है कि अवेयर भी हैं, लेकिन उसके बाद जो मुझे लगता है कि इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट है कि उनमें क्या ये हिम्मत है कि वो अपनी राइट को यूज कर सकें. क्योंकि इवन हेलो हेलो
Yes, I can hear you, but there's some disturbance.
ओके. तो इवन मेरा जो ऑब्जर्वेशन है, मैं देखती हूँ कि एजुकेटेड वुमेन भी, अवेयर वुमेन भी वो हिम्मत नहीं जुटा पाती हैं. वो एजुकेटेड हैं, उन्हें पता है कि वुमेन के लिए लॉज हैं, पर वो हिम्मत जुटा पाना, चाहे वो सेल्फ डिपेंड, चाहे वो मीन्स अर्न भी कर रही हैं, फाइनेंशियली इंडिपेंडेंट भी हैं, अपने हस्बैंड पर डिपेंडेंट नहीं है, उसके बावजूद वो हिम्मत बहुत कम देखने में आती है। तो इसके लिए एज अ ह्यूमन राइट्स एक्टिविस्ट मैं क्या कदम ले सकती हूँ या किस तरीके से हेल्प कर सकती हूँ?
Right. I'm Shalini, right? I was speaking to Shalini. See, I wish I could give you a very simple answer.
Yes.
I wish there was an easy answer to give and an attractive answer. But I'm afraid that there is no simple, straightforward answer to this. It's true that the social discrimination, your social conditioning, cuts across economic lines, cuts across economic statuses. So it's not the case that only the very poor, domestic violence is only happening in slums. Domestic violence is also happening in the bungalows. That's true. It's true that the caste discrimination is not only about these far-flung off villages. Caste discrimination also takes place in a much more sophisticated manner in big cities also. So what can we do about the domestic violence? How to empower these women? Well, you empower these women by educating them. So that's, I think, was the Ambedkar's motto, that you educate and then you agitate. So you can go to these women, try and tell them that these are your rights under the law, try and inform them what would it be like if you take this course, and always keep on encouraging them. So there's no some quick solution. It's painstaking work, actually, going to victims, speaking to them again and then again. So that's there. Just empower them, just educate them about their rights, tell them they have this option available should they want to take it. And what we should do is that those women and those people who have taken this option, their stories need to be told more widely. That XYZ person, her husband was violent and she lodged a complaint, and then this happened, and today she lives in a secure environment. Today she lives a dignified life. So I think that is all.
Sir, may I ask a question?
Okay, we will be taking the last question. Jishan.
Yes.
Hello, may I add? Am I audible?
Yes, Jishan.
Right.
Yeah, sir. Do you not think women of the migrant workers faces three or four discrimination? First, because of their gender. Second, because of Dalit, Adivasi, or lower caste, and third, because of uneducated, illiterate, or poor, and fourth, because she has not a proper representation in trade union or in politics. So, do you not think this is the anti-discrimination law should be necessary? Or and my second question, the right to education, because it's a mention in UDHR also. I see ESCR on the children of the migrant workers or poor still faces, and it's because this treacherous situation forced them to indulge in child labor.
Right. I hope I'm audible. There's a bit of a noise problem.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Am I audible, Avinash?
Yes,
right.
sir.
You're right, Zishan. One thing that I'm noticing is that all of you are actually quite aware of all the problems which are there. And as I read all these questions, after reading this question, I also realize that you also probably are aware of the solutions. So like how Zishan is saying, what he's saying is more of a tautology. I don't quite understand what the question is, but when he asks that question, it shows that he has a deep understanding. So this discrimination, there are layers of discrimination. These are like different layers. So if you, instead of a city, if you live in a village, you are under discrimination. I mean, you are how should be the most accurate term? You are disadvantaged. Now, if you're living in a village and you belong to a lower strata of the society, economically speaking, you are poor. You are even more disadvantaged. Now, among the poor, if you are from the lower caste, you are even more disadvantaged. If among the lower caste, if you are from a minority religion, and there is caste system in minority religions, be it Muslims or Christian, you're even more discriminated. You're even more disadvantaged. And worst of it all, if you are a woman, then do you have it. You are the most disadvantaged. So when we talk about that the conditions of migrant laborers are bad, conditions of women in the migrant laborer category is even worse. So that's true. These are layers of discrimination, layers of disadvantages operating. So that's correct. And the second is, I believe the question is, should we have a anti-discrimination law? Look, this is a more of a, I'm often blamed by my friends and by my colleagues that I have a very Anglo-Saxon approach of jurisprudence towards the law, and I'm perpetually afraid of codification of the law. But again, you may argue, and you may argue successfully also, that we need to have a standalone separate law dealing with discrimination against women only, a new law. But I believe, in my experience so far, that there are laws, there are statutes already on the record books. What remains is implementation. Therefore, what we should do is to file more cases, lodge more complaints, make more interventions. So that's what I believe. And second was about, I believe, the child labor among the migrants category. I believe on child labor, we already have a special statute, Prohibition of Child Labours Act. And yes, there is child labor among the migrants, but there you need to treat it with some sympathy, especially in these circumstances. I'm not saying at all that child labor should be allowed, but I believe instead of punishing the parents, you need to take a more kinder look at their economic situation, and then you take the child and put the child in the school. What essentially I'm saying, that just don't make an intervention wherever you see a case of child labor, but not so much with a motive to punish the parents, but to improve the condition of the child. Right. Any more question are we allowed to take, Avinash?
Thank you, sir. Because of the
I
time
missed.
constraint, we will not be able to take more questions, but you can put your questions in the chat box, and we will be responding to you later in the group.
Right. In the chat box, I am leaving my contact. So those of you who have any specific questions, especially the legal question, I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right. I'm an advocate practicing in Delhi. And I know these webinars are actually a bit boring, I admit. They're not as engaging as interacting with people face to face, but I hope you have been able to carry some things out of it.
Yes, sir, we learned a lot, and thank you for motivating us to work for the society. And
No, I got motivated myself after reading all these questions and interacting with you all.
thank you so
I'm
much.
the one who is very glad. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to participate as a participant in your future events.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending the session. Link for feedback link will be soon. Will be there soon in the chat box. You will have 5 minutes to fill it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.